my body because I had to fight naked. Mom told me I have bruises all over my body. Is there any connection to this? There is a war going on. Even dinosaurs are here. And they use bows and arrows. My sword is unbelievably dull. If you die over there, what will happen to me back here? I don't know whether our body and mind are split. I don't know how we got separated, but I think we are still one person. We die together? Probably. No, it can't be true! I'm not joking. 12th and 13th century foreigners surround me. I must somehow make sense of our convoluted situations.
At last, we have returned to a regular schedule for the Pitchy and Palscast. No Louis this week. How are you doing, Matt?
Hello. I'm doing okay. I was not doing very well, and then I was doing okay.
Then a miracle happened.
Yes.
You witnessed a miracle. I was working out what to do for this week, and a bunch of weird tangential things happened, and then I spoke to someone who said, "Hey Pitchy, I gave you a film for your birthday. Have you watched it yet?" And I said, "No, I have not. I'll get on that." So now here we are, having just watched Avalanche Sharks, a direct-to-TV sci-fi channel-produced film, I believe, according to Wikipedia. It was certainly a low-budget Canadian production, that much was clear. And we watched Something Precious, which I decided to put in here as an introduction to Matt to several things, but also to really have a strong contrast between bad film and gloriously bad film. When you meet people who say, "Oh, I'm really into bad movies," you can then fall into a trap of just walking into a video shop that's closing down, or a department store or something, and finding whatever dumb exploitative schlock you can find and saying, "Hey, they'll probably get a kick out of this." But, particularly over the last decade, there's really become this cottage industry that's developed around convincing you to ironically purchase bad film. And so we get things like the sharksploitation movement, which I think really kicks off with Mega Shark vs. Giant Octopus, although that has far more of a kaiju vibe going for it. It's just a bad American pastiche of kaiju films, which really misses a lot of what makes the best of Toho's films when Godzilla was a babyface so entertaining, in favor of, haha, a guy says holy shit and then a bad CG shark eats a plane. That's funny. And I mean, that is a very funny clip. But here's the thing, it's funny as a clip. It is something that you watch on YouTube and go, ha! Have a good little absurdist chuckle, the sort of thing that you would see in, say, the important videos playlist. Not something that you would go to a cinema or purchase a DVD to see 90 more minutes of. But of course, when you've got 90 minutes based around some terrible schlock premise, you wind up with a film like Avalanche Sharks. Tell us your feelings on Avalanche Sharks, Matt.
It's just a movie that you want to get away from as soon as possible. It's not a movie that is... So it's not fun to watch. It's not fun to watch in any way. And it's not... It's just... It's a movie you don't want to talk about at all, really. You don't want to think about it because you feel like you're almost less of a person. Like, you've become a worse person for having watched it and thinking about it. It's not like... sometimes you can get something out of watching a bad film. Like, we're talking, when we talk about the movie we're going to talk after this, we can talk about the fun you can have. You can also get almost an education from it, can't you? Like, you can get,
yes.
Why was this bad? Or you can learn something about movie making by watching a bad
Or people.
film. Yeah, or people. This, there's no value in this film whatsoever. You'd have to plumb many, many depths to find anything, and I certainly didn't. So,
Alright, so I'll begin plumbing those depths.
Okay.
Towards the end of this film, alright, the base plot outline, in the simplest of terms, is some obnoxious teens are at a ski resort during a spring break, so they can have their sexy times on, because that's what you do in a slasher film. and then some sharks swim through the snow and eat lots of people, and a couple get out. There's a bit more to it than that, but that's the most base of outlines. Towards the end of the film, there's a few people left, including one particular villain, one particular hero, and a bunch of teens who are basically bad people. And one of the lead villains, who's been this utterly inconsiderate manager of the general ski watch over the course of the break period, is being maimed, and he's lying down and he's dying. And what should be a nice moment of karmic justice as he gets eaten by a shark, instead turns into the remaining people doing everything they can to save him. And while this might work in a better film as a part of a story about the difficulties of forgiveness and redemption, it really comes off as a bad bloke sympathizing with another bad bloke. The people who made this film think that this is the sort of guy who it's worth teasing a save of. And what really indicates this is that the closest thing we have to a protagonist in the text, a Marine who's on break, punches a woman. Oh, he doesn't punch. He elbows a woman in the face because she interrupted him while he was manhandling someone else. And he's apologetic and says sorry, but the fact that this is something he has in his muscle memory entirely indicates that he's a pretty bad bloke. And he is sympathetic towards other sorts of bad blokes, and the film wants you to be sympathetic towards that sort of character. That's the sort of mindset of the sort of people that would set out to make Avalanche sharks.
You could try and find other ways to logically pass that out. Like, you could talk about maybe, like, that's just because so much of this movie is just so horribly done. You could say that maybe, like, they've seen that scene in other pieces of fiction where the hero is, like, or so-called protagonist anyway, is, like I've seen things like that. Like, I remember Angel did it once where, like, there's two characters fighting, and then the woman comes over and she goes, no, stop doing that. And then as they try and they're punching each other, they accidentally elbow them in the face, and then there's that whole scene, and then it's like a bigger realization, you're such a horrible person. But,
yeah, this isn't a moment of awakening for that character.
No.
he just clocks her in the face because she interrupted him.
Yeah, and then he comes over and he says sorry, and it's like forgotten in like a second.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think though, like you could, if you were really, really nice to these people, you might say something like they did half the scene but weren't good enough to do the rest of it, because that's like a lot of their scenes. But
they don't think it's important.
Yeah,
is the thing.
And I think what goes to your point is that probably your reading probably is the correct one. It's just how sleazy and cynical the rest of the movie is as a whole.
Yes. So when we get from there, this film has a lot of women in bikinis, even though it's set in the snow, because the producers of this think that that'll sell. And also want an excuse, since they're in a position of power to give directions over actors. They want to have women take their tops off. Particularly young blonde women. I've never understood this thing that a certain sort of straight American white culture has around that Pamela Anderson aesthetic being like the pinnacle of beauty and attractiveness. I've never understood that. I don't think it's very nice to look at. I don't think it's nice to look at. I should accentuate that. And this film really wants to leer at some women. There's a scene where a couple walks off, and the woman, and of course, they're a horny couple because it's one of these sorts of movies, but then the woman says, "Please say that you love me first, I want more out of this relationship," while at the same time having a zip-up top zipped all the way down so you can see her tits. And that's the sort of thing that's going on where anytime this film gives the slightest inkling of being remotely clever, it then finds a way to undercut it with, no, we're just here to see some tits. That's the level of thought we're on. I'm just firing up Fate Grand Order as an example of exploitative horny schlock that I am a fan of. Avalanche Sharks is an example of horny schlock that I am not a fan of. Let's see what characters I get in my role today. Can I afford another role?
It's just him trying to justify an addiction. Do not, in the comments, if you want to comment, or if you talk to Mitchie later, Don't get him off the hook for this.
Please, in the comments or in direct messages, send me some iTunes gift vouchers. I need to buy more quartz.
Do not.
I can
be
stop
an
anytime.
enabler. Do
Anytime,
not be
man.
an enabler. I'd imagine it'd be the same type of friend would enable you for your weird porn anime game addiction. Would be the same type of friend that would give you Avalanche Shark for for your birthday and say, hey, you might enjoy this.
Right, next point about film.
Okay.
This film has woefully poor structure. And it's easy to say, oh, that's part of the fun. You can just see films that don't work at all and you can have a good laugh at that. There are poorly structured films, and then there's a sequence of events which have no relation to each other, and nothing particularly clever or interesting happens in any one of those scenes. If you have a little bit of that, and there's an example that I'll get to of this working in this film, but for the most part, there's no grounding for you to care about any of these characters. So, the only glee that you're going to get in this sort of film is watching them die in creative ways. They're just pieces of meat to get torn around by the sharks at play. But every single one of these scenes has a painfully long setup. They're all like 3 times the length they need to be. I mentioned the couple that's arguing, and it culminates in the woman getting eaten by a shark, and then the guy being like, oh no, I did love you. But that takes 3 times as long as it needs to get its point across. There's a scene where a girl convinces 2 men to race each other with snowmobiles, and then she gets eaten by a shark. That goes on for about 4 times as long as it needs to do. Every single time it just stretches things out because it needs to pad things out in order to be a feature-length project. Which means that normally I'm very focused when I watch things because I'm just thinking about ideas to talk about, ways the text that works or doesn't work, so I can't switch off when I'm watching visual media. I was starting to fiddle with my phone about 20 minutes in and basically didn't stop, because it was doing so little to fix my attention as far as narrative pacing goes. And the lighting, it's mostly... the great thing about shooting in snow is that there's so much light being reflected everywhere that you don't really need a lighting rig. You just shoot with natural lighting and it'll look fine if you're doing it in the middle of the day. So every shot just has that same boring, sterile look, even when it's location. But something that is weird is there's a couple of times where the editing wants to transition to a different scene, but it needs some way to jolt you back and get your attention and convey some sense of momentum occurring. So what it does is it will very rapidly cut to some footage of, say, a ski lift moving up and down, or just a camera panning across in an establishing shot, but they've sped up the speed of the shot in post to be several times faster than it normally is, as this really rapid 2-second cut in between a couple of scenes. And your brain just goes, what? And it's woken you back up.
It's the equivalent of like having a fly go across the screen, or like just suddenly waving hands in front of your face. Like just and it was the only thing that was getting our attention during the movie. It was just like, whoa, like, okay, what was that?
Yeah, it's why is this here? I guess it's to wake us back up. The editor knows that they've done a terrible thing.
Is it that, or especially because it came more common the later into the film it got, I think, which made me get the feeling that maybe it was a really, really bad attempt to try and convey a sense of like impending doom or like crisis, like to try and be like, okay, our establishing shots need to be very fast because the pacing of the movie should be fast at this point. Either way, it doesn't work very well.
Yes. Another way that a cynical film trying to get away with so bad it's good. And here's the thing. Here's the key thing between a bad film and a good bad film is intent and tone. Authorial intent usually isn't that important to impacting how you should be reading text, but it can be useful, and it will come through in a very cynically made bad film. Because good bad films usually come from a place of ambition and genuine drive. It's just someone doesn't know what they're doing and it all falls apart. There's some unique examples which ignore this. For example, The Book of Henry. But in this case, it tries to be clever about how it's so bad it's good by playing around with framing device. I've talked about how the plot is about teens and sharks on a mountain, but the film opens with an unrelated guy with a broken leg in a hospital talking to a figment of his imagination, which is a woman who's probably been in some porn, dressed in a bad cosplay nurse outfit, saying, "Hey, can you tell me something interesting?" And then he tells this story about sharks on a mountain. A couple of times throughout the film, she interrupts him to say, "Hey, that bit of the story doesn't make sense." And he says, "Shut up, go away." I think at one point, she even says, "This story would make a really bad movie." There is a line like that somewhere in the film, and I can't remember if it's in the framing or the text itself. But either way, that's the level of irony and wink-wink that this film is trying to use to make you think it's being clever, when it's a bunch of hacks making rubbish.
Yeah, I'm not sure if we've talked about this before on the podcast, so I'm sorry for repeating ourselves, but yeah, it's that bad movies that are fun to watch. They're very uncommon. I think that's like...
Oh, they're diamonds in the rough. That's why The Room still gets re-screenings now.
Yeah.
It is special.
It's not something you can mass produce in the same way you might be able to mass produce like something like a Marvel movie maybe, or like something like a blockbuster kind of like made by committee, just kind of like something that people might like to watch with their friends at the cinema. That's something I think you can mass produce because you have people with skill and crafts who kind of know what they're doing.
Yeah, it's basically you just follow the rules and you'll be good.
Yeah, but with bad movies, there's no such way to mass produce.
Yeah, because it's about the violation of norms.
Yeah, and it means that instead of you'll get a movie like The Room or like Book of Henry where... I'm sorry, my phone just flashed and now I've lost my phone. that's like kind of wrong.
I'll just fire up Fake Grand Order while you recollect your thoughts.
It's my phone's fault though this time.
I've got to grind the Prismilia event while I still can.
No, I'm not going to enable you. I'm going to remember what I was going to say. No, I guess all I was actually going to try and say is that this kind of a movie is a bit like an annoying teenager in their high school phase where they're just like, they think they understand what it is to make fun of movies, what it is to parody movies or to satire movies.
Yes.
But they really don't.
Yes.
I know that's kind of weird because I know you've said it to me before this podcast that the director of this movie is a very old man. So comparing to a teenager is a little interesting. Although with the levels of ridiculous...
Well, I mean, that sort of level of cynicism and schlock is the sort of thing that will... when you're trying to target a teen, like, that's the level... Since it's so basic, it's... Okay, here's the crux. I'm getting very wobbly in how I describe this. When you're a teenager, when you're 16 to 18 years old, if you're an avid consumer of media, and you're getting an interest in how the media is made, then you started to take those peeks behind the curtain. You've seen that the wizard is standing there, and is just some old guy with a balloon. And because you've seen this, you think you now completely understand everything. And you think that you get what is good and what is bad, and you feel like you've seen it all. And so anything that immediately jumps out to you and says, "Congratulations, you win the prize. You've discovered the true meaning of film," then you're gonna jump on, because you haven't seen enough yet to understand A, when you're being manipulated, and B, the value and the joy of earnestness. And that'll come with time. But it means that these sorts of films are able to grab onto that sort of audience.
Yeah, there's a difference between enjoying... I guess it's just between when you're enjoying a good bad movie, in quotations, you're kind of the one who... You're the one kind of in control. You're the one in charge. You understand what's going on, and you understand why the movie is bad, why it's went wrong. When you're the kind of person who enjoys Avalanche, you're the one who's being manipulated. because you've actually there's almost like another man behind that man behind the screen. Who's like,
yes, you found the wizard is behind the curtain, but you haven't found the director of the film.
Yes. And that's what this is. It's just such a cynical, nasty film. And I hate the fact that I watched it.
What's good is anytime, if ever we get more than 20 viewers and anyone personally just says, hey, why don't you do more like asylum films? I want to know about Transmorphers, Snakes on a Train, that Sherlock Holmes movie with the Iron Man suit. Which, to be fair, has the greatest scene that goes nowhere in any bad movie. The iconic cliff-climbing scene.
That scene went for ages.
The answer is no. You can listen to this again, and most of the comments I've made are just gonna pop up again. Because it's the same dull editing, the same lazy pacing, the same mildly competent but ultimately unengaging acting by actors who have been paid the lowest amount they can that the union will allow for such a piece of crap to be made. And they'll get on, the editors will get paid, the cinematographers will get paid, and hopefully they've gotten 1 or 2 shots that they can add to their portfolio and hopefully get attached to a real movie at some point.
Yeah, I said before that you can't mass produce good, bad movies, but you can mass produce these types of movies.
Bad movies.
bad movies. And I really liked your analogy during the film where I was trying to work out how these things can make a profit. And your way of... we kind of came with this analogy together, I guess. Like the idea of this movie isn't an investment in of itself, as it is a throwing of some poker chips into a pile. So this one doesn't have to make money, but all it takes is one of the this like machine gun of really horrible movies. Just needs one to work out just a little bit.
Yeah, just one of them needs that 500,000 to 1 million views on YouTube.
Yeah.
To get enough people to buy the DVD, enough TV stations to buy a syndication, and then you've made more money than you would have lost in making 5 more of these pieces of crap.
Yeah. And that's why when the people who might enjoy this film in that so-called ironic way are kind of annoying, because they would probably decry or generally like look down upon your basic blockbuster kind of movies, that dime a dozen kind of action film or whatever, when in fact the movies they are enjoying are essentially just that, but made for them.
Yes. Same model, different niche.
Yeah.
And different scale. But ultimately the same level of cynicism.
Yeah. The same game is being played.
You're getting work, brother.
Yeah. And at least the people who are enjoying those dime a dozen like blockbuster films, at least A, they have no pretensions over what they're doing. B, they're watching better movies. I'm sorry, but they are. Anyone who watched Mission Impossible Fallout over Avalanche Shark made the correct choice, no matter what level of movie knowledge they have.
I really should have seen anything except for the movie I saw on Thursday. I saw the Happy Time Murders, by the way. I might do a vlog on it. Or I might do a Palscast when the home release comes out. It's bad.
I'm very scared
It's
of this.
remarkably bad.
Is it more interesting than Avalanche Shark?
Probably.
Well, there's that at least.
But you know what's more interesting than both?
I think I know.
GARZEY'S Wing. Where do we begin? Alright, I'll give you the rundown. This is my way of introducing you to a man called Yoshiyuki Tomino. Yoshiyuki Tomino was a Japanese art student who graduated from, I think it was Nippon University in 1963. He very quickly got a job in a traineeship program under Osamu Tezuka at Studio Mushi. Osamu Tezuka is the guy who made Astro Boy, an extremely prolific comic artist, as well as quite a prolific animator. In some ways, you could argue he single-handedly built the Japanese TV animation industry. A very serious pioneer in the field. And through the 60s, he started to work out that he needed people to help him in all the various roles. And so he set up a bunch of traineeship programs, one of which was for a director traineeship. Basically, he hired a bunch of people, including Yoshiyuki Tomino, and was all, okay, you are here to work out not how to draw, not how to animate, not how to write, but how to essentially work the manager facet of being a director. how to assemble a team, lay out a script into a storyboard format, and how to allocate the resources to get this project done to a schedule. And after spending time learning this under Tezuka, he then went to Team TAC and worked under Leiji Matsumoto, doing much of the same thing. He started to have a more active role in storyboarding there. Then once he'd acquired this specific skill set of producing television animation on a weekly schedule to a schedule, he then went to work for a fledgling animation studio in the 70s called Studio Sunrise. While there, he did his first half of a season on a show called Yusha Raiden, then got a full direction project with Zambot 3. I'll talk about some of the shows he made in the 70s at another time. In particular, in 1979, he made a little show called Mobile Suit Gundam that we'll be talking about in detail. But something that I've been very specific in the way that I'm describing, that he learned to produce weekly television animation to a schedule, because if you look at any episode of Yusha Raiden, any episode of Gundam, Dunbine, Elgaim, Brain Powered, all the way through to Reconquista and G 2 years ago, or was it 3 now? They're all paced the same way. A lot of how he structures things is the same stuff that he learned in the 60s. And he's got quirks. He's got some issues. Boy, does he have some issues. Boy, does he have some ideas. But what's of note is the few times he's worked on projects which aren't 50 episode or 26 episode weekly television animation to a schedule, he does not know what he's doing and weird things happen. One day we'll get to the Gundam movies because he recut a 42 episode TV show called Mobile Suit Gundam into a film trilogy, and interesting things happen because of that process. But every other time, things get even weirder. And at its peak we have, in 1983, he directed a 50-episode weekly TV show called Or About the Dunbine, about a guy in Japan who gets whisked by magic to a magical land where people have magic robots, and it's this fun fantasy adventure / war drama story. He liked the setting that he'd come up with there, and so he tried to go back to it a couple of times. And of note is in 1996, he wanted to do a distant prequel called GARZEY'S Wing. But by this time, Sunrise had been bought out by everyone's favourite merchandising juggernaut, Bandai. And he had spent years arguing with Bandai executives about the direction of shows. So he went, I'm gonna take this idea to a different studio. Hey JC staff, I've got this idea, wanna make me do it? I made Gundam! And they went, yeah sure, let's allocate some resources. You can do a 3-episode direct-to-video series. Now here's something else about direct-to-video. It emerged at the peak of Japan's financial bubble in the mid to late 80s. As basically this way of we've got hired too many people, and we need them to work on projects, so we'll just chuck them some money, they can make something direct-to-video. If it's a hit, great. If not, cool, they've got something on their resumes. And they kept out of our hair while we're working out what we're doing. By 96, this was very much a format on the way out. People had less disposable income, the budgets on certain projects like Giant Robo the Animation had ballooned way out of control. So this is kind of a 10 years too late project. And on top of that, let's talk about GARZEY'S Wing, Matt. Tell me your initial thoughts on GARZEY'S Wing.
It's just truly insane. Like, just completely crazy. Like, ludicrously so. Very little in it makes any sense at all. Like, line by line is something just hilarious. The dialogue is robotic, to say the least.
Oh yeah, that's the other thing I was going to say. I don't think Yoshiyuki Tomino is a human being. I'm pretty sure he is a robot that was assembled by an alien race to study humans and their so-called culture and assemble something similar as proof to his masters that humans are a sentient race. Because all of his stuff, and sometimes it's really interesting because of the weird, stilted way everything's written, but no. Everyone is completely insane. And he doesn't know pacing either. Shit just happens. Constantly.
the start is the best part of this 3-part series. It just goes. It just starts and it goes. Like there's I was gonna say
he has like one line. So usually, if you're having a person warp to another world story, you'll have like 5 to 10 minutes of learning what their life is like, where they are at mentally, so you can go, okay, here's the problems with themselves. So maybe these are the things that they will learn about through experiencing this other world. No, he says, "Hi, too bad I didn't make that last college entrance exam." Whoa! I'm in another world.
So funny. Like, even the few little lines that he has before he gets on his motorbike and drives off are hilarious. Like, I think it's either a girlfriend or just a good friend. Like, and she has like a line that's like, what is it? "You're so easygoing," or something like that.
Yes.
It's like, it's not even an insult. It's just like, wow. It's not necessarily not wow, but she just goes, "You are so easygoing," and that's it. That's the end of the insult, and we're supposed to like take that. How
are we supposed to take it?
What was what you were saying there? Like, if this guy is a robot, that it's like he just took the kind of language that you use for like
establishing scene dialogue.
Yeah. But he accidentally used something that doesn't quite get across what he wants us to think of this character as like lazy or, you know, that kind of lackadaisical, that kind of a character. But instead he uses like a phrase, "easygoing," which just doesn't get across that at all, really.
Oh yeah, I should mention, by the way, that we watched this in the only way you should be watching GARZEY'S Wing, which is the English dub. The release was run by a company called Central Park Media. Now, Central Park Media was a publisher who kind of jumped on the bandwagon that Manga Entertainment had established in the UK in the late 80s of find the direct-to-video content, because that's where the good shit is. That's where people get killed and they swear, and there's sex, there's titties. Violence and titties.
No nudity or sex in this movie.
Yes. Yeah. Tomino's usually fairly good with such things.
Because he's a robot.
Yes.
He doesn't feel such feelings or emotions.
There's some good violence though.
Yeah, but even the violence is very blunt.
Yes.
Like, it's just matter of fact.
Oh, yeah, that's part of the beauty of some of the things we'll get to later. When we do other Tomino texts. My favorite blunt violence moment in any Tomino work is Gundam F91, where there's a bunch of big robots, and big robots in Gundam have big machine guns. And you know how machine guns work when they fire lots of bullets and you get lots of casings? Of course, these are 20-meter tall robots. And so there's a bit where they've broken into a space colony and they're opening fire on an unprotected civilian city. And as you see the crowd fleeing in panic, an ejected cartridge from a robot's machine gun crushes a person to death. God. It's amazing.
Why didn't we watch that?
Oh, we'll get there one day, man.
Yeah, I'd be very scared, actually, if, from what I'm hearing of this guy. I'm actually getting a much different mental picture now of this person than the one I was getting.
Oh, yeah, while you're watching it, tell us about your opinion, your impression of Yoshiyuki Tomino while you were watching.
I was just like, I felt a lot of envy, and I still kind of do, even though I've learned a bit more about him. Like, I was feeling like really envious of him, because it felt like he was that kind of like laissez-faire kind of writer.
Laissez-faire,
sorry. Like just writing is just so easy, you know?
You put words on a page and you got a story, you know?
It's just like, he reminded me a lot of like a casual fanfic writer, or actually just basically that, yeah. Just especially because it was a very much a self-insert kind of like fanfic kind of a story, and just the way that it seemed like he was the kind of person that would love to play with toys and would love to like come up to you and like, look at this action figure, it's amazing.
Look at the ways it moves, and certainly the ending of this is absolutely fanfic, where it's just the fic's dead. He doesn't feel like writing anymore.
Yeah, it's over.
They fight their way through a canyon, and that's it. Bye.
I should say I've compared a few movies we've watched in this podcast to fanfic. Like, I'm talking specifically about bad fanfic here. Like, I'm sure there's like many good examples of people who who know how to write a story, who've written fanfic, but like I'm talking about like your stereotypical gutter fanfic when I mean that. I'm not trying to disparage the entire medium when I say that this reminds me a little bit of a self-insert fanfic.
Yeah, unfortunately, Tomino can at times be a bit of an E.L. James and Erica Mitchell when it comes to his cooperation with other people in productions. But certainly there is very much this Cloud Cuckoo-lander-ish vibe that he's a bit pie in the sky. You listen to him in interviews and he'll be talking about his conceptualization of themes and the like, and you get this, you can see in the text here, I can see how what you described is in this text, but you don't know how to tell stories at all, mate.
Poor guy. I feel a bit sorry for him now. So like I felt a lot of envy for this person as I was watching the film, but now learning a bit more about him, I'm more imagining someone who was very good at very practical things, as you were saying, like managing and...
Yeah, his shit gets done.
Yeah. And I'm imagining someone who was probably pigeonholed into that kind of a thing because he was good at it. He was probably I'm guessing he was good at that managing side of things.
Yeah, like basically no Yoshiyuki Tomino production from memory ever had a production collapse. Because productions can and do fall apart all the time. I talked about Studio Shaft when we did Gizmono. A recent example, there's a sci-fi series of books from the early to mid 2000s called Full Metal Panic. The early books were adapted around that time, then had this long gap because the studio that had the rights decided it sucked and wanted to work on better things, basically. But now a bunch of that production crew's back, and then they fell 3 months behind schedule and it just looks like garbage. Whereas like Tomino shows, he was usually quite good at finding talent as well. A lot of good creative people worked with him over the years, and really good animators, but
yeah.
the productions are done. When you work with Tomino, your project will be completed. It'll just be written by an alien.
That's the thing, mate. Like, I'm imagining someone then who is really good at the boring stuff, and when you're good at something, often you can kind of end up doing it a lot because they know that you're good at it. You know that you're good at this one thing. So I'm imagining someone who, like, he would be working with people who are very creative, either if they're actual writers or just animators. Like, he'd be working with people who just can tell stories really well, just naturally. It's like their natural talent, and you have to work with these people every day, and you have to like deal with their shit as well, probably a little bit as well, trying to manage them, trying to get them to do stuff on time, which I'd imagine could be a real problem in that kind of industry.
Hey Nagano, how's your wife?
And I don't know. I'm obviously projecting maybe a little bit here. Like, I don't know him at all. But it feels like a kind of guy who must have, like, I imagine in that scenario, you would jump at the opportunity to want to, you want to be that person. You want to be the writer. You want to create your own thing. You can do this. And it's just so sad that it seems like that's not the case at all. He's like that, in a lot of stories, there'll be like the main character and there'll be like an ensemble, and sometimes the main character will get knocked out, especially in the kind of stories where the main character is a chosen one or something like that. And and especially because they have like a natural kind of affinity for it.
Yes, Yoshiyuki Tomino is the chosen one who will save anime.
And it's like that chosen one gets knocked out, but then and the member of the ensemble is like, oh, I can step up, I can do this. And like they probably try really hard, they've been in the shadow for so long, and then they get the chance and they just can't do it. And I feel like that is Tomino. Like, he just can't, if this is what he is in every other movies that he's done, like he just doesn't have it, and that's so sad. I think that's really sad.
His stuff at its best comes really, really close to being truly great, but instead they often just come off as really interestingly awkward. Mobile Suit Gundam, the TV show, is equal parts this utterly groundbreaking piece on war in children's media, while also being the weirdest episodes of 60s Star Trek. Like, it's this war drama, which has an episode where they go to an island where an old man says, I'm gonna use robot martial arts, and throws boulders at bad guys. There's an episode where it turned out that the producers and writers on the team had learned that you can die of iodine and sodium deficiencies. So there's an episode where the ship runs out of salt, and they need to go behind enemy lines to get more salt. Otherwise, you can die if you don't have enough salt. And they're so fascinated by this fact that a year later, when they make a space opera called Idion, the same fact comes up and fuels an episode there as well.
When you think about creating a story and how hard it is to create a good story, it's like when I hear stuff like that, it shows just the disconnect between what you think writing a good story is, or even just being a part of that industry. It's I need to know how themes work and arcs work, and I need to plan things out. And then I hear stories from you about that, they just got really interested in this sodium fact, so they wrote it into the story. It's it's two different worlds, one in my head and one that is actually there, of how stories are made in that industry.
I hope that we can at least take some solace as someone who often has a creatively induced anxiety where I tell myself I'm not good enough and nothing I do is worth paying attention to. And that there are people who are probably way less competent than me who went on to wind up in groundbreaking projects. Your stuff is worth doing, is the lesson, I guess, of GARZEY'S Wing.
You can have weird ideas about sodium and just kind of put them in. The idea that anyone could get something like this made is just it's so crazy. This is a terrible film.
I think we should describe to the audience. Every time I would look over at Matt, he was either doing one of two things. One, holding his hands right up against his nose, as he's just trying to cower in shame, yet can't look away, that children hiding behind the couch when the Daleks are on screen effect. Or, his hands were just waving because his brain had finally given up all motor control and was just flailing around aimlessly because life is meaningless. And it turns out that the ennui of the universe is perfect. And we have no control over our lives. And all is transient. We are going to die. We are all mortal, and we will never comprehend why. That is the lesson of GARZEY'S Wing as you're watching it.
I just needed it to stop. I just needed it to stop for a second.
You needed to breathe, and it wouldn't let you.
Especially that first episode. This is in this is a bit it'd be like how you say it, Kazumori.
Kizumonogatari?
Yeah, had 3 parts. That was 3 movies instead of 3 episodes, but it kind of has that same kind of thing where you see credits between each of the acts. That first episode or act, oh my god! You could probably just watch that, to be honest. If you don't have much time.
Yeah, that's the strongest bits.
Yeah, that has the convoluted line.
Oh my goodness me! Let's see if I can pull the clip up. Oh no, I pulled it out. I pulled out the flash drive.
That's okay.
Yes.
You should describe it though, because you probably heard it.
Alright, so the main character, he's been warped to another world, but then out of a jump cut out of nowhere while he's walking through while he's holding onto the edge of a raft running down some river rapids, it then turns out he still has a physical form in Japan, in present day Japan, and it's more that there's a partially dissociated spiritual form that's been sent to this other world. Although his corporeal body still has consciousness, he's just experiencing two things simultaneously. But there's just enough disconnect that they have to talk to each other about what's happening to themselves, resulting in a scene of saying, "Hi there, I'm in another world, me, and my body is taking damage, so that's why you're now covered in bruises." And after a bit of conversation like this, Japan protagonist says something like, "I must comprehend our convoluted circumstances." That is his lining in the English dub, and it's unforgettable. It perfectly encapsulates the way you're feeling, as well as just how alien this text is.
It feels a lot like... I think we've actually had this... I think I've probably said this before about... I wish I remember which movie it was, but it reminds me a little bit of... those Twitter things where they I fed this robot all this script. It's a bit like that. I'm realizing now that...
Again, Tomino's a robot.
Yeah. I'm realizing now why that joke was so funny to me, because it's actually feels true in some cases. And yeah, this, like, every line of dialogue is so robotic, and it means that, like, not every line is laugh out loud worthy, but there's always something. There's always something to get a little titter out of you, or just like it's just so ludicrously off.
The Japanese dialogue is awkward and alien and bland, but the English dubbing is individual people who don't really know how to do voice acting, being isolated in booths and fed a bunch of lines, may be given some direction, but I think it's pretty clear the voice director just wanted to get in and get out, get this shit done, much the same way Tomino does. So everyone, like, why I specifically say it feels like a lot of the actors don't have experience is they're not talking the way I am talking. They're not projecting with their diaphragm. It's like they're not confident that the mic is going to pick them up. So they shout! Most of the actors are shouting their lines, which means they have no capacity for emotive range. Hi there! I'm gonna help you, the chosen hero, fight the things. Yes, we must go to the Barajuju tree. I am a villain. I must make sure that you have not found thing. Rather than speaking, with cadence. It's wonderful. So even when the dialogue is functional, it's still absurd.
Yeah, and there are times when even if they didn't have any direction at all, like some of the choices, like even if that was literally the first choice you made and the only time, like you said blind once and it worked, like there are times where I'm like, why did you go with that? Why did you think the line should be spoken like that? Like it's just, it's the shouting, it's the roboticness, the robot way that they talk. Sometimes just like they'll say it in a slight emotion that isn't really
the right one.
Yeah. It's like, in that way, it's not just a robot, it's a robot that is desperate to understand human emotions, but just keeps making the wrong choice.
Yes. It keeps accentuating some of the most spectacularly bizarre parts of Tomino's direction style, purely through accident and incompetence.
It's like Tomino is Luke Skywalker in that Empire Strikes Back scene where he keeps trying to hit like the stuff that Darth Vader is throwing at him,
yes,
and he's just continually missing each time. And that's Tomino trying to understand human emotion. It does have a similar. It's interesting that of these two movies, they both have a similar problem of pacing.
Yes,
and in both of those films, it was the only reason why we could tell that we were in Act 3 in this movie is that there is literally credits saying delineating.
Yes, because it's the third episode of a direct-to-video series.
Yeah. Otherwise, it very much felt like a run... well, now I understand why. It very much felt like just a random episode of a TV show.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the final battle of this movie. And I think it's a big problem, obviously. Yeah.
It's amazing. Basically, you go from guy gets flung into the middle of a slave rebellion and retreat to trying to fend off some pursuers to we've established we need to get to this tree, the Baraju tree.
Yeah.
And then we're fighting in a canyon on the way to this tree, and then we continue to fight in this canyon, and then we fight some more in this canyon. We have this moment of, hey, I can't use my magic wings. So the main character, the way that you know he's special is that he has angelic wings growing out of his feet, but only if the correct people are praying. And this power diminishes over the course of the story because reasons. Never defined reasons, it just happens. And maybe he requires some spiritual help from people in Japan, which is also never really explained. Though it does lead to this great moment where he's just kind of passing out while at a pool party. And then a girl who was mad at him because he'd moved out of town just goes back to his home and hangs out with him. Like a good Japanese wife. And then Matt rolled his eyes there. Good. And so they fight in this canyon. And then he gets his magic wing shoes back. And then roll credits, basically. But it's not just roll credits there. It's he's then suddenly in Japan riding his motorbike. They look up at the sky and see a cloud that looks kind of like a tree and say, hey, look, it's the Bardoju tree. And then the motorbike sprouts the magic foot wings, and they fly away, and then you roll credits.
So, like... I was gonna say so one thing about that, and then but you can't say one thing about that because there's so many things.
And this is before the jealousy plotline.
Oh god!
There's a jealousy plotline where one woman is jealous of another woman for being remotely attached to the main character at all, even though there's no romantic tension, because again, robots wrote this. But you don't find out about this until the subject of jealousy has an internal monologue resolving her jealousy.
Hey, it's an arc, right? Like, she said she was jealous, and then she said she wasn't jealous.
But there's only one sentence of time between!
That's how arcs work. You start it, you then finish it, right? Like, that's how it works. I guess one thing to look at, all those things you're talking about there, I do think probably the worst thing there is the GARZEY'S wings not working and then working. I just feel like in an even remotely competent story, you would assume that usually, let's just go with the usual example. Usually if the hero's special powers aren't working, it's because of something happening with them. Probably like an internal conflict.
Mm-hmm. It's a form of expressionistically conveying an internal situation.
Yeah. And even if you don't want to do that, it is the most common, and I can definitely see why it makes perfect sense. But even if you didn't want to do that, at the very least, usually there'd be a reason why they don't work, and then you find out the reason why and you resolve it. and there is nothing like that in this movie. There's never a suggestion of why they stopped working, other than maybe, like, she says that her bells aren't very good anymore, but it's like a problem that it's an issue and an obstacle in the story, and it doesn't go into why it's an obstacle, why it happened, and it never goes into how they resolved it. It just doesn't work randomly, and then when the time comes, it works again. And that to me is almost like encapsulates this guy does not know how a story is supposed to work at all.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's a shame because I guess one last thing I want to say with the GARZEY'S wings, like the actual wings, they are kind of a cool concept. I love the fact that they are from the feet instead of like from the shoulders that you would normally expect a human being to have. And I really like the idea of it requiring someone else to say the prayer. You know, because usually the hero is just the hero by themselves. Like, it would, it's just them. So I kind of like the idea.
You like the collaborative aspect.
Like, that's kind of a cool idea. It doesn't make a story, but it's
and there's
a
a
cool
bunch
idea.
of there's a bunch of like 3 or 4 episode direct-to-video sci-fi animes which kind of operate on that, where you'll have some sort of big, powerful robot and some brunette woman who's a bit demure who has to power the robot, and there'll be a shot where she's naked and it's over a glowy white background, or glowy yellow background. There are like 3 or 4 direct-to-video series I can think of which have this exact same image of a brunette woman with this glowy yellow background powering a robot. It's like Detonator Orgun has it, Hetty's Project Zeorima has it, Dangayo has it. I feel like there's a 4th one.
Well, it's a cool concept. I don't know about robots. Robot seems a strange one to do it. Like, if it was a robot, you think it'd be more like her.
Well, it's late 80s, and apparently that's the cool thing to do, so...
I don't know. Like, I feel like a fantasy is more interesting. Like, or like having to do like a prayer or like a spell. Well, that's interesting. Like, with a robot, you think it'd be more like either an AI brain somewhere or a battery of something that's like outside of it. That'd be more interesting. I don't know why a demure brunette woman would be the reason why a robot.
Because it's hot.
Okay.
Well, okay. I think that's a good spot to end on, unless you've got other things to add.
No, not really. I guess one thing that should be said is that the gobbledygook in this movie. We talked about the robotic.
Oh
dialogue,
yes,
but,
yes.
Like, even if these voice actors were competent and had time to enunciate and to like get some emotion through, and even if like the writing was better in the dialogue, just the words of like
the place names and creature names.
Yeah. Oh, they're just like, if the roboticness and the poor dialogue in general is like the cake, this is like the icing on it. Like, there's also just these smatterings of just nonsense that comes out of their mouths, which is just so funny. Yeah. Definitely watch this over
Avalanche
Shark.
Sharks.
This is definitely worth your time, even just the first part. Yeah.
Yes, that's a good spot to end on.
Yeah.
So if Louis here next week, we'll probably do some wrestling, because All In is happening soon. If not, we might actually do some more Yoshiyuki Tomino and explore the world of Mobile Suit Gundam. So until then, thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you next time.
Bye. I'm scared.
Good.